In this video, I am going to be responding to a few comments that I received on my last couple of videos because I think that these comments brought up really interesting points of discussion and topics that I just want to delve into a little bit more. Also, I will put a link down below to the videos that I am going to be talking about a little bit more in depth today, so if you haven't checked those out yet, you can do so if you'd like. I also just want to quickly preface that this is very much me just sharing my take on things, and this isn't factual information. It's going to be more of a philosophical discussion, I think. So we're going to be talking about things like humans and shelters, the nature of nature, and the future of our evolution as a species. And my hope is that I can just further continue this dialogue as I respond to some of these comments and share my thoughts, and open it up to you to also share. Because I'm learning so much from you as I read the comments, and yeah, I just kind of want to keep that going. So I hope that you find this interesting to some degree and that you receive value from it. And without further ado, let's get into some of the comments. I agree with this for the most part, but humans flat out would have died if we weren't cave dwellers and didn't build shelters. So we are also one with the caves and therefore boxes. Important to get out in nature too, for sure. I just want to say that that title or thumbnail could more accurately be named "You Don't Belong in a Box" 90% of the time. But it just doesn't quite have the same ring to it. If I were being technical, that's what it would be called, because I acknowledge that shelters are necessary. And I think people's comments kind of made me reflect a little bit more on the importance of shelters, as much as I am advocating that we spend more time outside because we are cooped up indoors quite a bit of the time. I also recognize that shelters are a part of the animal kingdom, that other animals have shelters and we, like the other animals, have shelters too. And I think it helped me gain a deeper appreciation of my shelter, even though I don't love it because I live in a basement suite that's very dimly lit and I crave like the light, the natural light. I'm still very grateful that I have a shelter, and I do not want to undermine anyone's experience with homelessness, for example. I'm not advocating that we go homeless, but I think that due to the nature of the thumbnail and the title, some people maybe thought I was suggesting that humans should live in nature without any sort of roof over their heads. And I just want to clarify that that is not what I'm suggesting. I more so wanted to point out that there are so many benefits to prioritizing spending time outside, and at the end of the video, I suggest that we spend as much time as we possibly can. And so that's going to look different for everybody. Let's move on. One person said, "You live so lavishly and have your whole life that you long for something that you have no idea about. How it actually feels to live permanently outside with nothing. It's extremely painful and hard. You get sick much quicker. Even little cuts and scrapes last for much longer and get infected. You don't adapt, you just live with more constant suffering." And then another person said, "You don't understand what it's like to be homeless or truly live off-grid. Yes, people complain of their modern urbanization lives, but if you try to live in nature for even a few months, it will get to you. Try to abandon your house completely in town or city without having that clutch. It's almost all mental in the end. Then the stress will start to creep up to you instantly." So again, I think that perhaps these people were interpreting that I was saying that we should not have shelters. That's what their comments suggest to me anyways. I very much agree with these people. Again, I don't want to undermine the difficulty of living outside with very little. I think that we live in a very different day and age than that of our ancestors, in the sense that we don't have the types of communities that they did. They not only still had shelters like we do that were obviously different but still protected them from the elements, but they also had communities where they helped each other and they taught one another about the land and how to survive. We don't have that really anymore nowadays. It's not common for us to have mentors who are helping us survive. And so I would say that, yes, I absolutely agree. And humans aren't meant to live alone in the wild. I think that if you are going to live in nature on a more permanent basis and have a more rudimentary shelter, for example, it's important to have a community. And I don't know how anyone does it alone. I think the examples are few and far between. And I think like the show Alone, for example, highlights this. I don't know if you know the show Alone, but essentially it's 10 competitors who go out into the wilderness, and each of them is alone. And they only bring 10 items or so with them that they can use to survive with. And it's basically a competition to see who can last the longest. Towards the end, as you know, the last two competitors are battling it out, you can tell that they are at their wits' end, that they are really just hanging on by a thread. And so I think that show really highlights that, yeah, we have incredible abilities as far as surviving in the wild, but we cannot do it long term on our own. And I want to acknowledge that. And I think that's something that I want to discuss more on my channel, is how we can build communities nowadays that can help us to rewild and to learn more about the natural landscapes around us. Because it's not easy, and it often takes a lot of intentional effort. So that is something that I will likely discuss more in the future as I think of ideas. All right, let's keep going. Another person said, some of the points are good, but you are glazing nature. Nature is beautiful, but also cruel and ruthless. Nature is like a god. Try to understand it, maybe appreciate it if you want, but always be wary of it, because you aren't and never will be chosen by God. Interesting way of putting it. I think what is brought up in this comment for me is the nature of nature. So is nature good or is nature bad? Is nature both? And my take on this is that nature simply just is. But we experience nature as good or bad throughout our lives, depending on our lived experiences. So for example, if we experience an animal attack, or we witness, two animals fighting to the death, we may view nature as kind of cruel and ruthless. If we see two human beings who are complete strangers helping one another, we may think, wow, nature is beautiful and kind and good. So to summarize, I think how we view nature just largely depends on our lived experiences, and that it's good or bad only in relation to those experiences. But if you think of it very just objectively, I think nature just is. And I think this ties in nicely to the next comment, which brings up the appeal to nature fallacy. I had never actually heard of this fallacy up until now, and I looked it up, and essentially what it is just you view nature, anything that is natural, as better than anything that is man-made or artificial, for example. It was interesting to have this brought to my attention because it did help me to reflect on my own tendencies and how I view nature in relation to my own lived experiences. And I do think that I have a tendency to view nature in a positive light. I guess what I'm trying to say is I do have a bias towards nature. And so I think that's something that I need to be aware of as I move throughout the world and as I try to inform my decisions. Because just because something is man-made, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse than the natural alternative. Sometimes it can be better. Something that I'm really grateful for that is man-made is synthetic insulin, for example. I have family members who rely on that to live and be well. So I think it's important to be aware of our bias. Do we have a positive bias towards nature, and we think that just because something's natural, it must mean that it's better for us? Or do we have a negative bias, and we tend to think that nature is a cruel place, that humans shouldn't be in the wild, and therefore we miss out on the benefits of being outside? Yes, in the wild there are dangerous animals, perhaps parasites, things of that nature. And those things could obviously potentially be harmful to us. But also spending 90% of our time indoors, which is a statistic in the US, that's not great for our health either. So I think that it's important to be aware of our bias towards nature and allow that to inform our decisions. I think all of this ties in nicely to the next comment. I received this comment on my video, You Are Nature, How to Feel a Part of the Natural World. And it says, technically and somewhat paradoxically, since we humans are nature, All the artificial stuff we build and produce is just as natural as anything in the natural world. Just as we are the products of the transformation of starry stuff, our products are also novel transformations of those same elements. Glass, metal, concrete, plastic, synthetic chemicals, etc. are forms of nature through a human filter. I've often felt the need to repudiate the unnatural world we make, to find all that's wrong with it, and view it as something alien to this planet, when in fact it is a manifestation of the creative forces that made the planet and cosmos. I think our responsibility as humans, with our special degree of consciousness, is to monitor and improve all our transformations of the elements so they benefit us, all beings, and the universe more and more. And to your video and message, the better our relationships are to the non-human natural world, the better the human world will become. And since we are nature, the better our human world becomes, so much the better for nature as a whole. I feel that there's a lot to unpack in this comment, but I just want to say, wow. This comment resonated with me so much, and I thought that it was very well written, very well explained. And it's interesting because as I was creating my You Are Nature video, I started to have that thought. If humans are animals, just as the rest of the animal kingdom, then isn't everything that we do and create a part of nature too? And for the sake of the video, I think I just wanted to stick with the simple kind of binary of anything that's man-made is unnatural, so to speak, and then anything that is directly from nature is natural. So I kind of just stuck with that, but I started to have that thought of, well, if you're really defining humans as a part of nature, then by extension, everything that we do and everything that we create with our intelligence is nature too, just in a different way. This comment made me really reflect on even just the topic of shelters too, how if we have a bias towards nature, we might have a negative bias towards spending time indoors. And I guess I started to recognize that perhaps I have that bias at times. And I think that this comment just really made me reflect on the beauty of the shelters that we create, because while some of them look a little bit cookie cutter and boring to me, we also have incredibly beautiful architecture. And again, all of this is very subjective, right? I even had one person in the comments say, well, I really like the 90-degree angles and whatnot of indoor environments. For some people, they really like that modern look, and everyone's different. I do prefer a more organic, kind of just natural shapes and curves in my own home. But then I also can appreciate like an A-frame cabin, for example, and sometimes I'm kind of torn as to what I want to have in the future. My husband loves the idea of having like a 3-story A-frame cabin, and I think that'd be really cool, but I also think it'd be cool to have like a cob house that was just very organic feeling and curvy and cozy. I think both are beautiful in different ways. And so, yeah, this comment just made me think about how beautiful and wonderful it is that humans can take a raw material from the earth and turn it into something else, like an instrument, and then we can create music and we can dance. It's just incredible. It's amazing to me that we can take these raw materials of the earth and create experiences with them. Just the fact that right now I can have the experience of creating something that will be heard maybe on the other side of the world is pretty incredible. I also just wanted to speak to our ability to create and kind of the responsibility that that carries, as we are very conscious beings and we're aware of our consciousness and how our actions affect others. I do think that we have a responsibility to try our best anyways to have our creations benefit not only ourselves but the world as a whole and other animal life and plant life. I think that it can feel overwhelming if we try to say to ourselves, we're not going to create anything ever again that is harmful to another being. I don't think that would be realistic, and I do think that it's important not to get caught up in a perfectionist mindset when it comes to this, because perfection doesn't exist. We still have to live and use, I guess, the natural resources, so to speak, of the earth in order to survive. But my philosophy is that we should create with the intention of reducing as much suffering as possible and helping life continue in in a balanced way, ensuring that our ecosystems are balanced and not just dominated by humans only, for example. The last comment I couldn't find, but someone was playing devil's advocate and was basically saying, okay, if we're aware of our evolution and we are spending more and more time indoors, wouldn't it make sense for us to then kind of allow ourselves to adapt to indoor settings so that future generations could survive climate change, for example? They could spend more time inside, away from an Earth that is inhabitable, or in space vessels, for example. Even if theoretically this were to happen someday, where humans could only survive and live if they were indoors 100% of the time, I personally would not want to live that way. I think that I would suffer mentally and physically, and I don't think that I'm alone in feeling that way. And maybe future generations wouldn't feel that way, but I'm very much concerned about the now. Are people suffering as a result of climate change and being indoors 90 to 100% of the time? Are they suffering for those reasons now? And I would think that in a lot of cases, yes. And so I'm interested in reducing suffering now by finding more sustainable ways of living, by deepening our connection to nature, by getting to know the land around us. And I think that as we do this, we not only reduce suffering in the now, but also in the future, and we kind of prolong our ability to live outside, where I think animals were always meant to be. And again, yes, shelters are necessary, but I think it would be sad if humans, as well as the rest of life, couldn't survive unless it was in an indoor environment. I don't think that would be survival at all. I think we would wither away personally. Maybe we could adapt. I don't know. I'm not an expert on evolution, and it's certainly interesting that we humans are aware of our evolution. Interesting to consider how that plays a role in our future evolution. On that note, I do think that we have a decision to make as a species. We can either choose to allow ourselves to adapt as best we can to indoor environments, or we can choose to rewild and get back to nature and learn more sustainable ways of living and marry the old with the new. Use the wisdom of our ancestors in our modern context and hopefully have the best of both worlds. I think a lot of people hear the term rewilding and they think that means going back to living in the wild completely and abandoning all modern technologies. That is not at all what it is. I am using modern technology right now as I speak, and I'm grateful for it. I recognize that there are pros and cons to living in a digital age. Sometimes I get fed up with it, but other times I love it, and I'm so grateful that I have access to so much information and I can learn about nearly anything that I want to. While you do have to be careful with the information that you take in and careful about the sources that you're using, in general, I am super happy that I get to learn about whatever it is that I want to learn. We live in a very unique time in human history in the sense that we can look back and learn about various generations of people, and we can even make educated guesses about prehistoric people. That's really cool. Generations in times past didn't have that ability, and so I'm very grateful for it. I'm getting a little off track here, but basically, in saying all of that, I think people need to recognize that rewilding is about marrying the two, the old and the new. I love how Arthur Haynes kind of depicts this decision that we have to make in his book, A New Path. I'll put the image somewhere on the video, but you can see that the image shows this decision that we have to make. Are we going to allow ourselves to continue down this road of being indoors most of the time, eating really processed foods, or are we going to take the path of rewilding and learn more sustainable ways of living and bring that into our modern context? I choose the latter, and that is basically what my channel is about, is exploring how we can do that. And I want to explore ways in which rewilding can feel accessible to as many people as possible, because I don't think that everyone wants to go back to living in the wild. For some people, that may be their jam, but for some people, that's not going to be feasible or realistic, even if they wanted to. So how do we make rewilding as accessible as possible to as many people as possible? I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas down in the comments. And feel free to share any other thoughts that you have on, the nature of nature and our future as a species and our evolution. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that we can continue this dialogue and just continue learning from each other. I've learned and gained so much from reading your comments, and it's really helped me to think more deeply about these topics and is helping to inform my own thoughts and decisions. So thank you very much. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.